Good morning. All right, we'll get started with day number 2. So welcome back to the conference. Before we get started, I wanted to just make sure that everybody knows that we delivered the awards to Kate Hash of UNC Chapel Hill right there on the corner. So again, congratulations. And also congratulations for the Tar Heels. So there was an amazing game, and it's really good to see one of our customers winning a national championship there. So today we have another exciting day of lots of different sessions planned, and starting with this keynote. And before I actually introduce you to the keynote speaker, we also have some students coming in following this particular session, as well as other universities really sharing their own experiences, especially working with students. So I'm excited to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Michael Wesch. He's the Associate Professor of Cultural Anthropology from Kansas State University. Dubbed the Prophet of an Education Revolution by the Kansas City Star and the Explainer by Wired magazine, Dr. Wesch is a recipient of the highly coveted U.S. Professor of the Year award from the Carnegie Foundation. After 2 years of studying the implications of writing on a remote indigenous culture in the rainforest of Papua New Guinea, he turned his attention to the effects of social media and digital technology on global society and education. His videos on culture, technology, education, and information have been viewed over 20 million times, translated in over 20 languages, and are frequently featured at international film festivals and major academic conferences worldwide. Dr. Wesch has won several major awards for his work, including a Wired magazine Rave Award, John Culkin Award for Outstanding Praxis in Media Ecology, and he was named an Emerging Explorer by National Geographic. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Wesch.
All right, I'll explain the camera in a second. So I'm an anthropologist, and as an anthropologist, we study all humans in all times and all places, and that sometimes even means our students. And so I'm going to tell you a story about a night I had recently in which I went out to actually study our students. And this night actually ends with a really important moment in my career, and that was the moment at which this young man danced up to me and offered the answer to a question I'd been asking for 12 years. And the question was, what is a real education, and how do we go about getting one? So that's the big question that I've been pursuing for 12 years. And the story actually starts here. 20 years ago, I was a student in this room. And I came back as a teacher 8 years later, and then started pursuing this other question. But 20 years ago, I was a student, and I had very different questions. And those questions were things like, who am I? What am I going to do? Am I going to make it? I was just broken up with, and I felt a little broken. And as my professor of anthropology started talking about all these places in the world, I thought, that's the place for me. Like, I just want to get out and go live a life with these guys. And so as soon as I graduated, I got on a plane, and I made my way to New Guinea. And I really had really big questions on my mind as I was going. I was wondering, I had been broken up with, so I'm kind of thinking about what love is. And then I fell in love just before I went to New Guinea, so I had already been broken up with and then fallen in love again. So now I'm in love, and I'm going to New Guinea, and I'm kind of wondering, what is love? And do people halfway around the world feel love in the same way that we do? What is the nature of being human? What are the limits of human freedom and creativity and connectivity? These are all the things that I was wondering as I set off on my journey. And so I get to New Guinea, and this is the first picture I took. It's a picture of a palm tree, which I grew up in this small town in Nebraska, so this was a really big deal. I know it doesn't seem like a big deal around here, but to me it was a big deal, so I took a picture. And this actually was the last picture I took in this community, because I walked out the next morning with this great idea that I was just going to go meet as many people as possible and just feel what the world is like halfway around the world. And I walk out the door and just start walking down the streets, 7 in the morning. I got my big backpack on, and these two guys are walking toward me, and they say, "Hey, Moni." And in New Guinea, they speak like a pidgin English, so I thought maybe they're saying good morning. So I say, "Oh, morning, morning." and they say, "No God, money, money." And now I'm kind of onto it. I understand they're asking for my money. But I decide to kind of play it off and kind of act dumb about it. So I say, "Oh, morning, morning." And they say, "No God, morning, morning." And they start tapping their pockets like this. And at this point, I decide I'm just going to try to make them laugh and walk past them. So I pretend they're teaching me a greeting, and I say, "Morning, morning," and I tap my pockets. And they don't think it's funny. And the one guy steps in front of me, and he pulls his jacket back, and he's got this big machete in there. And I turn my back so that if he slashes at me, he'll just hit my big backpack. And I start running. And I get around the corner, and fortunately around the corner were all these wonderful people, like the people I'd hoped I would meet. And they chased these two guys off, and I walked straight to the airport. And I'm like ready to go home. And so then I'm standing at the airport, and I'm looking at the board of departures. And the first departure is to Brisbane, Australia. I thought, oh, that'd be great. I could just get back to something that looks more normal. I could maybe learn to surf and just have a great summer. And then down the list were all these like little villages that I had never heard of. And I realized that the answers to my big questions were not going to be in Brisbane. They were going to be somewhere down that list. And that was like my first big lesson about the joy of education, the joy of like having a big question. When you have a really big questions, they'll take you farther than you ever thought possible. And so I got on the plane to this little village in the middle of New Guinea. I actually got on several planes, smaller and smaller, until I was flying into the middle of the island, into this little grass airstrip where there's no electricity, no running water, and my money will be no good. So the moment I land, I'm completely dependent on the locals. And so I land, and people look at me like this. And then the plane only comes like once every 6 weeks or so the plane leaves, and I'm back here again. And I decide maybe I haven't gone far enough. So I decide I'm just going to put on my backpack, and I'm going to keep walking. You know, these people are still like in Western clothes. Like I really wanted to see like the edge of human experience. I wanted to see how different humans could be. So I started walking, and I walked through mountains like this and past villages like this and into villages like this, and ran into this guy. And later I was at a zoo, and I found out that one kick with a sharp inner toe can disembowel a predator or even a human. But I didn't know that, so I got the close-up. And then, and then I'm walking into this village here, and this is where I would actually spend most of my time for the next 8 years. And this is the place where I would be adopted into a family and live with them. And so I would actually live in this house here, right here with the two kids in front of it. And so inside the house, you can see what life looks like here. There's no electricity, no running water. You just sit around a fire. You plant your own crops and so on. Those are actually my legs up in the corner there. I'll go back to this image here so you can see this. So at one point, they bring me, like it's a week into my stay there. You can see my sleeping bag. I used to call my sleeping bag My Little America, and I would just cozy up into that sleeping bag at night because there's these giant rats and big bugs and stuff that scurry around at night. So I would just seal myself up in the sleeping bag. And then after about a week, we had found this snake, and it was like, you know, from here to the podium there. And we cut it up and we ate it, and it was actually pretty good. And then that night, I'm really worried because they found this snake like 100 feet from the house, and I figured, you know, that snake probably has family, and so I'm curled up in my sleeping bag extra tight. And that very night, even though as tight as I was, you know, protecting myself from this kind of thing, I wake up in the middle of the night. The sleeping bag is off of me because it's the tropics and it gets kind of hot. And there's this thing laying across my chest. It's like this big around. And I managed to grab it, and I threw it off of me. But as I threw it, I rolled with it. So I know I'm wrapped up with this thing somehow. And I managed to pin it down with my left hand. And I try to free my right arm so I can pin it down with two hands, but I can't move my right arm. And at this point, I realize I've actually pinned down my own right arm like this. And my arm had just fallen asleep and was across me like this. So there was no snake. And then I have to like explain to them why I'm wrestling with myself on the ground. And all this sounds really funny, but the tragedy of all this is that I don't speak the language. And all I understand at this point is one word, which they've adopted from English, and it's the word white man. And all I hear is blah, 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 white man, and then roars of laughter. And this just goes on for months. The language isn't written down, so like it's really struggling to learn the language. And in the meantime, just feeling laughed at. And this sounds funny, but if you put yourself inside that space, you realize just how hard this was. And I went back to my journals just last summer and read through, and I realized I'd actually been like really, really depressed for about 8 months when I first got there. And then I had this moment where I was walking along this ridge, and I was kind of realizing that like here I was halfway around the world pursuing these big questions, but I was really like locked down. I was not talking to anybody. I wasn't connecting with anybody. I wasn't actually learning anything. I was really just enduring this. I was just trying to live through it. And I got so depressed as I looked around because I thought, man, this is such a beautiful place, and I can't even enjoy it. I'm so locked down. And I just got so depressed, I actually collapsed, and I just was crying on the side of this ridge. And these two guys who are walking behind me come up beside me, and they say, Mike, first I should say, the first thing I notice is that they're already crying. So that we're crying together on the side of this ridge. They don't even know why I'm crying. And I'm just like amazed by their empathy that here we are crying together. And then they say, Mike, why are you crying? The only thing I could think of was I miss my wife, because I was married to her by now. And I said, I miss my wife. And they just started laughing and laughing. They said, oh, we would never miss our wives. And then they started crying again, and they said, oh, but we miss our kids. And we sat up there crying together for like an hour. And after that, I felt this really deep connection to these guys. They'd always called me brother. They'd always like adopted me into their family and considered me a brother. But until they cried with me and someone, I really felt safe. And once I felt safe and I felt connected, I had this realization that what I was really feeling down about all that time was that I thought that when I went to New Guinea, I thought that who I was inside of me and that I projected that identity outward. But in my moment of sadness, I realized that who we are is actually reflected back to us by the people around us. And when you're surrounded by people who don't know who you don't know who you are. And when they cried with me, I felt known. And once I felt known, I felt safe. And once I felt safe, I started trying new things. I started playing with the language. I started doing all these. I'd learned faster than I've ever learned in my life. And that's when I think that to me was the real education. I had these big questions I was pursuing. Then I felt connected. I felt known. And once I felt connected and known, I could try new things, and I wasn't afraid of failure. And I learned faster than I've ever learned in my whole life. And that became like the recipe that I wanted to bring back to my own students. Like I wanted them to feel what it's like to ask big questions, feel connected in a way that allows you to try new things, and don't be afraid of failure. So these are my friends who cried with me on the side of the ridge there with their kids there. And there's me blending in, but I won't let you figure out which one I am. So then I'm back at school as a professor, and I have this idea, like questions, feel connected, try new things, don't be afraid of failure. And questions is the key. And so I paid attention to the questions my students were asking about midway through my first semester teaching, and they were asking questions like, how many points is this worth? How long does this paper need to be? What do we need to know for this test? Like, these are terrible questions, right? These are not the questions that are going to send them all over the world. And so I started thinking I needed to retool some things. And then, of course, they're connecting in new ways as well.
Look at myself today. Every girl in the picture is locked into her phone. Oh, every single one is dialed in. Welcome to parenting in 2015. They're all just completely transfixed by the technology. Peralta knocks it into center. David tonight 2 for 2, a leadoff single here in the fourth, and nobody noticed.
So I became like really interested in understanding this world. I'm an anthropologist. I want to understand culture, and I wanted to understand like what's going on in this world. How can I get them to experience a real education if they're stuck in this world? And so there's a lot of studies coming out lately showing that students are less empathic than before. There's a lot of concern about what's going on. And I decided I really needed to get to know my students a bit better. And so I actually, one of the things I did is I started looking at what was happening on social media. And one of the things I want to point out is like in normal life, my students look normal. They look very average and just whatever. I started noticing on our Canvas, which is our online system, our students were importing their profile pictures from Instagram and Facebook. And I was amazed that like these ordinary people looked so amazing on Canvas. And then you go follow them out to Instagram, and they look even more amazing. And I was just like, they have like these filtered lives that they're living where they filter out all the blemishes. They look amazing. They look like models. They're always doing amazing things. And they're like, they look like a advertisement, like what's going on. And And so then I decided, man, there's such a disconnect between me and my students. And so I decided that I would need to like go really like maybe sit down with them and have lunch with them. And so I started having open lunch. And so I go out to open lunch with my students. And the rule of open lunch is that essentially you can only do big talk, no small talk. Like it's only big questions, and we just like talk about life. And so every day, students would sign up, and we would go out to lunch together. And I started hearing all these amazing stories, and the first thing I noticed was that these kids actually do have really big questions. They're asking the same big questions that I was asking, like who am I, what am I going to do, am I going to make it? One student talked about how he had this video game addiction, but he wasn't really sure, like, he really felt like it was coming from another source. He felt like such a failure in school. He just could not get anything but D's in school. He thought he was smart, but just nothing interested him. He couldn't like hold his interest, and so he spent a lot of time sort of escaping the identity of being a D student by going into video games where he could be a star. But he was wondering who he really was. Another student told me about how when she was in high school, her parents had broken up, and her mom had gotten into drugs and was staying out a lot at night. And by her sophomore year, her mom was going out all night and sometimes not coming home. And then one day, she just stopped coming home altogether. And she was too ashamed to tell anybody at school, so she just kept going to school as if everything was fine. And then one day, she got a foreclosure notice. She wasn't paying the bills, and the house was being foreclosed upon. She thought, man, I'm going to be homeless. So she goes to school, and she's acting out like she always did. And her teacher pulled her out in the hallway. She started yelling at her, and the girl just broke down. She's just crying. And she just says, I don't want to go on. And this English teacher took the time to listen to her story, and that night actually took her home with her. And she's lived with that English teacher ever since. She graduated at valedictorian, and then she was sitting in my class as an accounting major, but she hates accounting. And she's just an accounting major because she's like, I'm never going to be homeless. I'm going to take care of my life. But she's wondering if she can really do it, and she's wondering what she's going to do. And then another story, like on the other end of the spectrum, is like this amazing student seems to have everything together. And in many ways, I felt like he really embodied everything that I was trying to teach. He was asking great questions, he was making connections, he was trying new things. But he just was getting frustrated with school, and he came to me saying, like, do you think I should drop out? And if I drop out, am I going to make it? Like, these are really big questions these students are wrestling with. And in the meantime, there's all these easy answers around them. Like they just get bombarded with easy answers. Like you can just open a Coke and open happiness, or go to Starbucks and find community, or just buy stuff and show people who you are. And then the same method, the same like sort of messages that are coming at them through mass media are now coming at them from their friends as well, because their friends are all looking amazing and doing amazing things, and they're kind of wondering. Actually, I had one student show me this picture and said, like, where is my picnic on the beach? Like, where is my handsome man on the beach offering me a picnic? And she was really frustrated about this. And so I started then thinking more deeply about my own class and like, what is my role in all of this and developing these people into the people I want them to be. I decided I need to look further afield and look to alumni that I thought had really done great things. And so I reached out to alumni, and in the meantime, I was actually drawing at the same time, learning how to draw because I'm a terrible drawer. And I just wanted to try something hard, and so this is where that developed into. I started drawing and then started making these animations. And this is a story of one of my former students who was really great as a student, like always came prepared for class, but really felt like there was something missing in his life. And one of the things he learned in my class that he mentioned was the hero story, which is this story that occurs all over the world where people are called to adventure, they go on a road of trials, and they're somehow transformed. And there was a girl in the class who really had been transformed, who had gone on a road of trials. And when he met her, he was instantly drawn to her, and she was drawn to him. They fell in love. And I thought they would just live happily ever after. They even raised a kid together. But then a few years later, he wrote to me and he says, she left me, I'm lost. And he says after that, he just started running. He said it was just something that he couldn't not do. And so he ran day and night, month after month, sometimes up to 20 miles a day. He ran through all seasons and ultimately ran through an entire year. And then he says one day he was running through the park, just trying to figure things out, and it was as if like he was lifted outside of himself, and he could see himself running through the park. And he looked down on this little guy with all of his struggles and thought, you know, you're that guy going through that road of trials. And he suddenly had this immense compassion for himself come over him, and he looked down on himself and he said, my goodness, you're a hero. But he didn't think of himself as like a hero, like I'm better than everybody. He actually started running around the park and seeing heroes everywhere. He started realizing that, you know, we're all doing our best to serve others. We've all been through something, and those things we go through change us. And it was this compassion and wisdom that ultimately healed his own relationship. So then I'm back in class and thinking about these, you know, what did he get out of my class that allowed him to heal his relationship? And what is this real education we're going for? And so then I decided to face up to David, one of my least favorite students. So David sleeps in all my classes, and when he's not sleeping, he looks at me like this. And so I'm constantly looking out at this sea of people and seeing this, and it's really hard to see. I mean, for me as a teacher, I really watch how people respond, you know, and like the slightest little twitch matters. It fuels me or it destroys me. And when I would see him out there sleeping, it just crushed me. So, you know, I'm in this like fancy tech room with 2 million points of light at my disposal and a laser pointer, and I'm trying to like really dazzle him, but it just never works. In one of my rooms, I have 4 screens, and I literally dance on tables, and it still doesn't work. And so I just get like really sad every time I look out and see him sleeping. So I start to feel really down about myself. And at one point, I just, you know, I start to get really mad about it. And this is when I thought, okay, you know, I need to do something about this. So I went up to him in class, wake him up, and I say, hey, you want to go to lunch? So we go to lunch, and I asked him why he slept in my classes, and this is when he tells me about his video game addiction. But it turns out he doesn't just play games, he also makes them. And he started telling me about a game he made on hexagon cards which uses mythological figures. And it turned out that he learned more about mythology than I know, and I teach a class on mythology. So I started to see him a little differently. I started to realize that school had put him into a box that made him feel like just a D student. And I wondered what would happen if we changed these things up a little bit. So I invited him to be part of a different class with no lectures and no textbooks and no grades. A class where he could use his talents and work with other students who are developing their own talents to create something special. And this, maybe he could redefine himself, not as a D student, but as somebody else. He ended up working night and day throughout that whole semester on a game, a really special kind of game. And I saw him in a very different light. In the game he was working on, I'll just show you a quick glimpse of this. He went up to a retirement home, got to know some people who had Alzheimer's or living with people with Alzheimer's, and he developed this game that allows you to live as if you are recovering from, or coming down with Alzheimer's, and you have these memories come back to you that sort of show you your life. It's really an amazing project. So then I'm back here again in class, and while that little experiment worked in the small class, I was still coming into these big classes with glazed over eyes and wondering, like, okay, where's the real education here? Like, and how can we bring it into this kind of space? And I started then realizing maybe my assignments weren't working, and so the next assignment was field work, and I had my students go out and do field work in the world, and I thought maybe I should go do my own assignments and see if they're working, see how they work. And so the assignment is to go do field work. You're supposed to get uncomfortable, do something you've never done before. And so I told my students, you know, I haven't seen the hours of 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. for like 10 years, because I have a 9-year-old. And they said, okay, well, we'll take you out, we'll give you a tour. So this was my chance. I was going to be a field worker again. It was time to sort of put on the garb. But this time I was going to dress up like a student and see what life is like. So I'm mic'd up, so you'll hear a clip here. I'd like not get caught. That's my main thing.
Yeah.
It's a little weird for me to explain what I'm doing out here.
Project for anthropology.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to explain.
And so I'm actually dressed up in this hat here. This is my student outfit. And the students immediately pick up on this.
You look enough like a college student.
Yeah. The hat really pulled it together.
Yeah, so I thought this is pretty much the only part of the outfit. And the plan is we're going to go climb buildings. And so we're just roaming around campus trying to evade security and find a building to climb. And so we're doing pretty good. We're climbing up ladders and fire escapes and things like that. And then we come to this building, and I'm just shocked that they want to try to climb this thing. Here they are describing what this is going to be like.
Yeah, we go up the stairs, and then we have to climb over onto the ledge and walk around and then jump up from there.
Wait, is that actually happening? So death will be at hand.
Yeah.
Man. So there's actually a 6-inch ledge, 3 stories up, and you have to go out. You have to leap from the stairs to the ledge. And I'm just you guys are crazy. And then I started to feel okay, am I liable if I'm with them? I'm having a lot of different fears come up at this time. And the gravity is not the only problem. There is also the problem with security. So at one point, we're sort of scheming our plan of how to get up there, and then this happens. Oh, I don't know if you heard that. There's just a security guard. You can hear his walkie-talkie there. And then the students start talking loudly about their homework, and the security guard peels off and oh, they're just talking about homework. So we got away. But you might realize that I'm basically putting my career on the line at this point. I'm very, very nervous at this moment. And you might wonder why I would do that. And it actually has to do with that student I told you about who was about to drop out. So it turns out he did drop out, and he sold his car, and he bought a bike, and he started riding his bike south, and he rode into Mexico, through Mexico, ultimately into Central America, stayed with the Mayan family for several months, and then ended up in Colombia. And at some point along the way, he found what he was looking for. He found a sense of exactly what he wanted to do with his life. And he wrote a few essays. He sent them off to the biggest scholarships in the world. And he ended up getting a Marshall Scholarship, which is one of the biggest scholarships in the world. But more importantly, when he came back, he kind of came back with this sort of joie de vivre, a sense of life that I'd forgotten, the joy of really getting out and feeling the jagged edges of the world and leaving your blood in its soil and really getting to know a place in new ways. And I realized that's what anthropology is all about. It's about really getting to know a place by really doing the things that the people do. And so I decided to go ahead and climb those buildings with those students. Oh. Was that just your foot, or was that the ladder coming loose?
Oh wow, this is kind of cool.
So as we looked out over the night sky, and we hung out there for a half an hour, just having these big philosophical discussions. I remember the magic of doing things like this, that magic of sort of testing your limits. And I realized that this is where they're putting the big questions into practice. This is where they were not just asking who they were, but really testing out who they were and testing their own limits. But time was short, and I had to go to a frat party, the next stop on the tour. So off to a frat party.
The stereotypical movie frat party I've ever been to.
Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. Holy cow, look at this.
Yeah.
I mean,
you've been in already, right?
Yeah.
You think it's a tour?
I've seen it. Sure.
It's real slippery and sticky. Oh, yeah.
Oh, just wait till you get on this carpet. This is like the game.
And frats have their own security, which actually was a lot tighter than the campus security. It's basically a bunch of first years who roam around making sure you're supposed to be there.
Who do you know here?
I know Garrett.
Wait, you know him?
I'm Wesch, yeah.
Oh my God! I was in your class.
Thank you.
Dude, yes!
You look really old, that's why I asked you.
Apparently that hat didn't work. And So pretty soon people started recognizing me, and you'll hear like a whole line of people start forming for selfies.
Can I get a selfie with you?
What's that?
Selfie?
Sure.
I took your class. It was my favorite class ever, and I promise. Like really, really, really.
Thanks.
Can we take a picture with you?
Sure.
So then we realized, we really have to like get into it and feel what it's like to really be at the frat party. So I think it's time to start dancing. And I'm with a friend of mine, a student who is also like not really a frat guy, and so it was kind of field work for him too. So here you'll see us talking about dancing.
And you're doing field work too, right? Yeah. Should we like go like dance downstairs and like just feel what that feels like? Okay. All right. Let's go lose ourselves. Okay.
I don't know, can you dance to this music?
I've never heard this music. It looks like you have to have a partner.
Yeah, facing the same way.
Yeah.
All right, and I'm starting to feel like really out of place, and I'm just starting to feel really lost, kind of in the same way I felt in New Guinea, when I was crying on the side of that mountain. And I go outside and I start just interviewing people out that are just hanging out outside the frat party, and I actually run into this girl, and she says, like, whenever I'm in a place like this, I always remember that story of you on the side of the mountain in New Guinea. And this is her talking about that.
What stuck with me was you don't know who you are when you're surrounded by people who don't know who you are.
Right.
That's kind of crazy. It's kind of like college, like when you come here and nobody knows.
This happens here, right? I mean, you can feel kind of lost at a party, and
like who am I? If no one knows who I am.
And so these students are actually feeling the same thing that I was feeling in New Guinea, the sense of like, who am I, and trying to connect with other people. And it made me think differently about the frat party. It sort of feels like a place where you just go to like hook up. But I think a lot of people go there just to connect and be with friends and have a good time. So then we head down to the bars. And I really, really want to dance and really feel what that feels like. But it's kind of intimidating. I mean, some of the people are just like astonishingly good dancers. And so I'm having a hard time like really losing myself and getting into the moment and remembering what that feels like to really dance. And this is the moment when my guru catches my eye and he dances up to me and ends up changing my life. So we're back here again to the guru. And so this is actually Ming Xin. Ming Xin is a Chinese international student. And I was actually able to catch up with him later and find out a little bit more about where he was coming from. I asked him why he moved to Manhattan, Kansas. This is what he said.
So why did you come to K-State?
That's a really funny thing. This city called Manhattan, right? You know, I thought the Manhattan, oh, that's really cool. Manhattan, big city.
Yeah.
Yeah, in New York. No, okay, I said, yeah, okay, Manhattan is, yeah, cool. They sent me here.
Oh, man.
And so he got to K-State, and he's in this little town, and he doesn't know anybody, and he can't talk to anybody. His language is not very good. It's very similar to my own story of going to New Guinea. And so in that story, I sort of heard my snake story. You know, I knew there was something deeper, and so I asked him about that, and he said just how hard it was when he first got here.
The first year, because I live in the dorms, so I think because my English is not good before I come here. So I just stay at the dorm, watch some videos, play the games, and yeah, I didn't go out, didn't talk with anybody. And I just stay at the dorm and watch the video and try to learn. But it's hard, you know.
He talked about how much he would sleep. You know, he's just really depressed, and he would just try to sleep. And he was just trying to endure it the same way I was trying to endure New Guinea. And then as he's watching all these videos online, he's picking up a little bit of the English, and he's actually learning to speak English mostly by watching his favorite rap stars on YouTube. And so at one point during the interview, he stops and he pulls out like one of my favorite songs, which is Lose Yourself by Eminem. Here he talks about that. So this is the moment when he really starts to find his voice.
The first song I loss of self. I can sing a little bit. If you had one shot, one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted, one moment, would you capture or just sleep?
And he told me, like, would you capture it or just sleep? It really, like, spoke to his own situation.
His palms are sweaty, Lee's weak arms are heavy. There's vomit on the sweat already. More spaghetti, he's nervous, but on the surface looks calm and ready to drop bombs. But he keeps on forgetting what he wrote down. He won't crowd goes so loud. He opens his mouth, but the words don't come out. Yeah.
And that he opens his mouth, but the words won't come out. I asked him about the words, lose yourself, and what they meant to him. And this is what he said.
You lose to yourself. Like you stand, like you're the huge forest that only a person, only you stand in the forest. You can't find a way to get out. You like this, yeah, you know.
Yeah.
You know what I'm thinking?
Yeah. And I really felt that connection to him from what I felt in New Guinea, and that sense of like you don't know who you are when you're surrounded by people who don't know who you are. And he really was changing. He wasn't the same person he was in China. In China, he'd been like this really outgoing guy, and in America, he just closed down until he found his dance.
Yeah, after 1 year, I think, yeah, that you should talk with people, and you should, like, yeah, that I think after 1 year, I changed it back.
And what he did was he found a new language, the language of dance.
Music, dances, it's an international language. Yeah.
And he learned this dance, this language, the same way he learned English.
I always watch some videos, like some really cool guy they dance on, and they recorded themselves. So I always watch famous rappers. They move really like nature, like free.
And his best move is really, what I think of it as sort of like the magic mirror. I'll show you a scene here. So here he's going to do this really slow-mo thing. And what he's doing is he's looking across the room. There's my friend Adam doing this, right? And he's like just flailing around, right? And Ming Xin just slows it down. And then Ming Xin looks over at me and he starts doing this, which is, I think, like my hat and hiding from the world kind of thing. Like, so I'm basically there with my hat and my camera, not really in the moment at all. And I feel like he's sort of being the magic mirror and telling me exactly what's going on, and maybe calling out to me to actually move, to get out there and dance. And so at this point, like, I mean, I've got like a camera like this out there. I mean, I'm being like the anthropologist, and I'm just like, you know, sort of zoned out with this thing. And then, then we come to like the final song, like it's my final chance to really break out and feel the music and feel what it was like to be a student again. And this is the opening of that.
Everyone has to be out of this area by 2. So 7 next 5 minutes.
So you'll hear them come up to me and encourage me here.
Just move your arms. Come on! Come on, move! Show me how to move!
And I'm just like doing this, you know, like it's like I just can't move. I just like feel locked down. And one of the problems is like you hear the song here. If you know this song, it's The Weeknd. And you know, I'm happily married, 40-year-old guy. It just doesn't feel right when they're saying things like, I don't know if you caught that, but I only F you when it's 5:30. Like, and it just seems strange for me to like get down to this song. But meanwhile, like I look over at Ming Xin and he's doing this amazing thing where he's like dancing with the whole room and bringing the whole room out in this magnificent way. And I feel drawn to that, and I just moved my arm, I just started moving. And once I started moving, like everything changed. It was like all the voices shut down, and all I heard was not the lyrics, but just like the flow of the beat itself. And that's when I realized that big truth that I'd been looking for all these years. And that's that you can't just think your way into a new way of living. You have to live your way into a new way of thinking. And this like really changed my life, and it changed everything about the way I've operated since. And that's when I realized this is why Jordan had to set off on his bike for Mexico and South America. It's why Ming Xin had to be in that bar that night. And it's why I had to be in that bar that night. And then as the final song started to play,
Last song. The lights come on.
I started to realize that I had lived the life of a 4-year student in 4 hours. I had started with first years testing the limits of their newfound freedom, second and third years at a frat party looking for connections, and on to fourth and fifth years taking a victory lap with friends of a lifetime. And I'd learned a lot from my students, that sometimes you have to risk your life to get a new perspective. Sometimes you have to test authority to taste freedom. And you know, the song itself maybe sounds a little bit crass. Like if you remember the lyrics here, here they come. But by the end of the night, it doesn't seem crass at all. As I look around and look at my newfound friends, I realize that these are all people who are graduating in a couple months. They're going to go off to new cities to find their new lives, and I start to hear something a little different. And I wonder where they're going to say they're from 10 years from now. But for now, the answer is clear. As Ming Xin starts to feel the joy of a night well lived, finding new friends halfway around the world, he yells at us from across the room. And that begins like this beautiful friendship that continues to this day. And I started to realize that this was really what it was all about, that I came with this formula that you have to ask questions and make connections and try new things. And I thought I could just get my students to memorize that and that would be enough. But I think the reality is like our students have to go out into the world and really live these things. And that's where all of us play a part in their education. It's not just me in the classroom that matters. It's all of us who craft the overall experience of what it is to be in college and get that real education. So I appreciate so much of what all you guys are doing to help create that space where we can all become better people. Thank you.
Okay, so does anybody have any questions for Mike? And if you do, I think we have some microphones.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Awesome presentation. Thank you.
Thanks.
Just wondering what the name of your book is, because I'd like to read it.
What's that now?
The name of your book?
Name of my book?
Yeah.
Well, it's not out yet. It'll be out in a few months. I have a book coming out called The Art of Being Human, and it's about kind of all this and how you then incorporate it into your life. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll look for it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Very interesting and very heartwarming. I'm curious to think about how emotional experiences might or might not be lived or experienced by students through an app. And I'm wondering if you might speak about that at all from what you've seen.
Students who are what now?
The emotional experiences
Yeah.
of students. So we think a lot about
Mm-hmm.
engagement, getting students engaged in campus life, and just wondering, any insights you have around emotional experiences and their relationship with technology and some of the things we're thinking about.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's an interesting point to bring up in that, there's a lot of concern that maybe students actually are not connecting as much in real ways. They're using technology to limit the ways that they connect or limit the depth at which they connect, so they can break up over text message. They can even have whole relationships over text message. They can use Tinder to create, they don't date anymore. They just can hook up in different ways. And so there's a lot of concerns about this type of thing. And the statistics about this are sort of confusing as well. So it can look like there's just like this new hookup culture that's emerged. And part of that is true. There are different moral standards at work than there were even just 20 years ago. But at the same time, if you look at, say, a statistic, very clean statistic that's very easy to get, recently came out, is the number of virgins who are 22. Like, would you guess they've gone up or down since the iPhone in 2007? It turns out they've actually doubled. So there are twice as many 22-year-old virgins as there were 10 years ago when the iPhone first came out. So, and that ties back to people are actually getting together less. It's not dramatic, but it's enough to sort of push the statistics a little bit. So all of this is, like, I find it still a bit confusing myself as to like what the broader trend of what's going on. But as far as like emotional life and so on, yeah, I mean, as far as I can see among my students is like, in some ways they have like, their lives are like too emotional in some ways. I mean, it's pretty dramatic stuff they're going through. I think it's easy for us to forget like how dramatic that time of life is. And this goes for, oftentimes for non-traditional students as well. People who are back in college for whatever reason are usually going through a big life transition, and that's a big part of why they're there. So I think we need to be attuned to that, and that's where I think you guys play such a key role. We have to be attuned to the fact that this is a full life transition for most people. It's not just gathering information, and it's not just gathering skills. It's a real transformation of the person.
I have a anthropology question because I'm also an anthropologist.
Cool.
And maybe the only other one in the room. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I started doing my fieldwork in the mid-'80s. And at that time, the technology, if there was any technology at all, I would take a long trip to send a telegram by shortwave and Morse code at the time. The latest trip I took with my students, I had 3G the entire time. I could basically live tweet the entire experience. And you know, I look back on my original experience with nostalgia.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I was more connected to local people by not being connected to the outside world. And you know, and I wouldn't go on a trip now without my cell phone.
Yeah.
For legal reasons, at least, you know, from the school's perspective. But would you have had your epiphany? Would you have had this experience if you'd had a cell phone with you in the highlands of Papua New Guinea?
No, I mean, that's a really good point. And that actually speaks metaphorically to what kids are going through moment by moment in school. And that is that the problem is when there's an easy substitute for real connection that doesn't actually involve you being very vulnerable, people will take that easy substitute. And that happens over and over again. So I would have taken the easy substitute of emailing, calling, whatever it would have been, texting somebody familiar, and it would have kept me in that space of knowing who I was. But it was really kind of awesome to go through a space not knowing who I was and have to reinvent myself and connect with new people. The same thing happens over and over and over again at school. My wife is a psychologist and worked as a campus psychologist for a long time. And toward the starting in 2014 to 2016, she started getting, for the first time, she started getting a lot of guys coming in saying that they were hooked on porn and it was keeping them from connecting with anybody in real life. And that was like really shocking, right? Because it is like high-speed porn is like this easy way to feel connected, whatever that means, or just, you know. But in the meantime, you then lose your sense of passion and excitement for people in the real world. And so these things I think are constantly happening, and it happens on a moment-to-moment basis. So there's the moment where you could go talk to a friend and you decide to text. There's a moment when you could go, you know, deal with a really hard issue like a breakup or something like that, and you decide to send a text. These are all things that are actually keeping us from the full human experience that we could be having. So it comes down to all of us needing to be very intentional about our technology use, and then somehow like encouraging others to do so as well. But it's not easy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.